Alrighty, good morning. The town meeting program is here. This is Wednesday, March the 30th, and our intention is to make sure Cordova homeowners who may be entitled to some help after financial difficulties created by the pandemic can get that help, because our guest today is Stacy Barnes, and she is with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. You may have heard of them. They've been around for many, many years. I think she said about 50 years in operation, helping folks with first-time home loans and other things. And the federal funds provided to offer relief for various expenses for homeowners. This is not the renters one now. That part's over. So this is for people who own their homes. And you'll learn all about the details about eligibility. She'll discuss the program on today's show, which is brought to you by Cordova Wireless Communications, your local cell phone and wireless data provider, which provides your local talk program. And we appreciate their support. So stay tuned and listen in. Stacy Barnes with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is coming up next. So, Stacy Barnes, nice to have you with us. What is your position, by the way, with Alaska Housing Finance?
Thanks very much for having me on, JR. I'm the spokesperson for Alaska Housing Finance Corporation.
Well, the perfect person for me to communicate with, then.
Well, let's see at the end of the interview how well I do.
Oh, now. We're not going to start by selling ourselves short. So, obviously, the last couple of years have been interesting to survive for for myriad reasons, but we've heard a lot about, when the economy sort of folded up and some people had to be let go from jobs, or, people's financial situation just changed as the economy was rocked by this pandemic. There was a lot of talk about assistance so people basically weren't going to be out on the street. We heard a lot about renters and landlords and various programs and controversies surrounding that. As far as AHFC, that part is kind of over, but there's still a message that you want to get out here for homeowners. So let's start there. What is it? Who are the people you're looking to help, and what's the plan for helping them?
Well, I appreciate you having me on to talk about it, because you're right. It is an important program that is designed to help Alaskans and Americans, for that matter. This is federally funded program, and it comes through the American Rescue Plan Act. The state of Alaska received $50 million to provide assistance to homeowners who were impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. At Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, it's our role to make sure that dollars get out to support those in need. And, the requirements for this program are essentially that, of course, you have to be impacted by COVID-19. You also have to qualify based on your income. And the way that you can apply is by going to our website at alaskahousingrelief.org and simply enter in your zip code and the number of people in your household, and we'll be able to tell you if you're going to qualify for the program. But again, it is federally funded through the U.S. Treasury, and so they set the income requirements in local communities. So, for example, in Valdez and Cordova, if your income in a household of 4 last year was $160,800 or less, you may very well qualify for the program. So I'd encourage you to get online to check your eligibility and get your application in before our deadline next Monday.
Okay, and again, that's a deadline that's coming up very soon, then April 4th. Basically that
That's
entire
true.
day till 11:59 p.m. When you say homeowners financially impacted by COVID, what form does that take in practical terms?
Thank you for asking that question. I think a lot about fishermen and women who may not have had an opportunity to get out on their boat for one reason or another. I think about families who have had to care for young children or elderly relatives who may have gotten COVID or had school children around them who were impacted by COVID. They lost their child care and they had to stay home. All of that meant they lost their income or they had increased expenses as a result of the pandemic. Now they're struggling to make ends meet. Maybe they're dipping into savings or having to forego important medicine and that kind of thing because they're focused entirely on paying for their mortgage or for their property taxes, perhaps even homeowner assistance dues or utilities. Alaska Housing homeowner assistance is designed to be able to pay for some of those expenses.
Okay. And AHFC, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, has been around for quite a while, in my experience, living up here my whole life. What is the general role of AHFC in sort of more normal times?
Well, we celebrated our 50th anniversary last year, and it's the mission of Alaska Housing to promote safe, quality, and affordable housing across the state. We do it in a variety of ways. We're responsible for all of the public housing across Alaska. We're also an agency who is able to provide mortgages to Alaskans. A lot of first-time homebuyers come through our program, and they would get a mortgage from AHFC by going to their regular lender, so credit union, bank, or mortgage company, and then AHFC would be the investor on their loan. What's great about that is jobs stay in Alaska, and we're able to contribute financially to the state. And we are an independent agency of the state of Alaska. And so in addition to those things, the legislature has called upon our organization a number of times over the last few years. About a decade ago, a little more than that actually, we were responsible for administration of the home energy rebate program, as well as for energy efficiency weatherization. And that program continues at a smaller scale. But that's just some of the examples of what we do. We're also involved in development of affordable housing across the state and partner with organizations that do that work.
Okay. Yeah, I knew you guys had been around for a while. In fact, there's even there's a chance, I can't remember now because it was quite some time ago, but we may have even, my wife and I, when we got our very first home after we got out of college and moved up here, that we might have used that program. I'd have to look in the files. So,
well, we certainly appreciate it.
Yeah. Okay. So if people go to alaskahousingrelief.org, it sounds like you're going to ask for some numbers and some data. I mean, is this like trying to navigate an IRS website, or is it pretty straightforward? What's the experience like?
We take great pride in developing a website that is going to be as user-friendly as we can possibly make it. So I promise you in 2 to 3 minutes, if you enter your zip code and the number of people in your household and answer a few basic questions, you'll have a good sense as to whether you're going to be eligible for the program. And if the answer to that question is yes, you do appear to be eligible, in another 5 minutes or so, that's all you'll need to apply for the program. It is really easy to use, but if there are problems and you'd like to talk to a human being, we've got Alaskans who are standing by during normal business hours. You can give us a call at 1-833-330-8290, and we'll be happy to help you out.
Okay. And I just sort of blew over it at the beginning, but you guys were involved in the challenges facing renters and landlords. And again, that assistance is actually already being dispersed. But how did it go? Did you get a lot of people responding, and did it appear to be a successful program?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. We had more than 30,000 applications that came in from across the state, and that represents 1 in 3 of all renter households. It really is a phenomenal number when you start to think about that many of our friends and neighbors who were impacted by COVID and eligible for the assistance. We have to date spent more than $253 million with funding that has gone directly to landlords as well as to utility companies for that program. So I certainly would say that it's been a success. There was an article in the Wall Street Journal that included mention of AHFC's of the work that happened in Alaska. And we were able to get the funds out pretty quickly, relying on a team of nonprofits as well as our staff who just frankly were all Alaskans, and everybody put their heads down and got to work and got this assistance out as quickly as we possibly could.
Good. And has there been, would you consider good participation in this program that is now still open for homeowners, or is it being underutilized?
Well, that's a good question, too. I like to think that as we reach out to radio programs like yours, that if there's someone who's thinking, gosh, I've never before used public assistance of any sort, I probably don't need this help, but they're foregoing medical bills or other critical expenses, and they're not sure how they're going to pay the next month's mortgage, or maybe they're concerned about 3 or 6 months from now because they've been dipping into their savings to pay the mortgage. Absolutely check your eligibility and go ahead and submit an application. As of this morning, we have 8,000 applications that have come in to our program. So considerably less than the rent relief program, but still, I think overall a pretty big number that reflects the need across the state.
Yeah, your compadre, Nance Larson, actually sent me some updated numbers, and there have only been about 99 people apply from the Valdez, Cordova area total.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't expect it, for us to have as many as, say, Kenai or Kodiak or some of the other places that are in the hundreds. You raise a kind of an interesting point. There may be people out there that, feel there's a certain stigma around asking for this type of help. Whether they come from that background of, well, I don't need anybody to help me, or I'm not going to ask the government for help, or that means I'm some kind of a failure, or that sort of stuff. What would you say to people who are not used to having public assistance that might really benefit for it, but are sort of wary of it for some reason?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that question, because I think that there are probably two things that I would say to a person like that. One is that the COVID pandemic came out of the blue and impacted Alaskans all across the state at absolutely no fault of their own. People went into their jobs at restaurants and found out that perhaps they didn't have the number of hours that they were scheduled to work just the previous week. And hardworking people relying on that income were just absolutely floored by the kinds of changes that we saw. So no fault of their own. Maybe now is the time to look at this kind of assistance. But the other is that the state of Alaska has been awarded $50 million for this program. And if we don't spend it, that money is not going to be reallocated in the state for other projects. It is not going to go back to the U.S. Treasury and reduce our burden. Instead, what it's going to do is be reallocated to other states. So you talked about when you and your wife first moved to Alaska. I'm not sure where you came from. Mm-hmm. I'm from Minnesota originally. Those dollars could go back to Minnesota. They could go to New York or California or Texas. And there are very nice people there who are in need. Mm-hmm. But it would be my belief that if we can help Alaskans who are in need of this assistance, by all means, we should do that.
Okay. Well, very good points. And again, none of us ever know, regardless of our income level, when we're going to end up in a situation where, we might need some help. Our beloved Corinne Erickson, who ran the Salvation Army for so many years, always used to talk about that, how you just kind of never know. And so that's why it's good to have organizations, whether it's them or whether it's an opportunity like this, to even if sometimes we got to set a little bit of pride aside. And I know how that feels. Our whole situation, folks in the audience are probably familiar when Robbie went in the hospital when he had our son had a cardiac event, and people were doing fundraisers for us and to help with medical expenses, and we were so not used to that, and it did feel odd. But when you think about how impactful it is that you've got people out there that are concerned for you, to accept the help. And we're talking about something a little different when it's people person to person, but it's the same idea. These were allocations that were made by people that we elected to represent us and to provide help. And the main thing is that there are some people who are probably going to suffer that needlessly, that don't need to, and that could have an easier go of things and should not feel guilty taking an interest in seeing if maybe some help is available here.
You're right, JR. And I really appreciate the story that you shared there, because the generosity of Alaskans never ceases to amaze me. Yeah. We are neighbors helping neighbors, and it's something that we can feel really good about. But to your point, we don't know what tomorrow brings.
Yeah.
And so if you've maybe just been struggling a little bit and think you're going to be able to get out of this, you probably will be able to. But why don't you go ahead and apply anyway? And you can always turn down the assistance later on. But after April 4th, there won't be another opportunity for you to apply. So go ahead and get your application in now and make the decision later about not participating in the program.
That's a good point, too, that you might as well keep your options open. And that April 4th deadline, again, is an important one in this whole process, which we'll come back to. We'll review the overall program. Are there any other facets of this, though, before we get to that resummarizing that people should know about the program or just the situation in general in your mind?
I don't really think so. The most important thing is that this deadline is coming up on April 4th, and we're giving folks all the way until 11:59 p.m. that night to submit their application to us. It's really simple to do. They can do it. Most people, frankly, are doing it on their cell phones, and they're doing it in just a few minutes. So that's easy for them to navigate and get their application in, but we're also available to take any calls from folks and help them through the process and answer their questions.
Okay, so let's summarize again now. Who are we trying to reach for anybody who's maybe joining us a little late? Who are we trying to reach, and what is it that you're offering?
So Alaska Housing Finance Corporation is a state agency using federal funds that has been provided to us to provide relief for homeowners who have been impacted financially by the COVID-19 pandemic.
And again, you said there could be loss of job, that could be a loss of job, that could be increased child care expenses because the place you take your kids, had to shut down or something, like just anything that made your expenses go up or your income go down, in essence.
Absolutely. They're having a tough time making ends meet. We want them to check their eligibility and apply at alaskahousingrelief.org and give us a call with any questions at 1-833-330-8290. But you're right, JR, that in addition to the mortgage expenses that might be able to be covered, AHFC using these funds may also be able to address utility payments. We might be able to address property taxes and other expenses related to home ownership.
Okay, alaskahousingrelief.org, pretty easy address to remember. And that phone number we'll mention again in the close. So if there's nothing else, Stacy, I really appreciate you and AHFC being willing to do around with the radio stations and I'm sure all kinds of different media to get the word out on this because that deadline is coming up. April 4th isn't that far away. Stacy Barnes, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, JR, for helping us to get the word out to Alaskans.
Our thanks again to Stacy Barnes with Alaska Housing Finance Corporation. That website, once again, you'll want to know, alaskahousingrelief.org. One more time, alaskahousingrelief.org to take advantage of the program that she shared with us today on the Town Meeting program brought to you by Cordova Wireless Communications on KLAM. We like having them as our partner, not only because of the services that they provide, but because they, along with CTC, are responsible for bringing millions of dollars every year into our economy, which then circulate through and turn into, about 7 different versions of whatever you need. Every dollar that comes in from outside circulates 7 times, they say, before it ends up leaving for any reason. So nice to have all of that brought in. Over $10 million a year. This program, as always, will go on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Cordova TV, for anybody who missed it, or if you want to refer somebody to it. We'll put out some reminders on the radio about that, too, that it's there. Thank you again for listening. We'll see you next time for Town Meeting, and the rest of your 10 a.m. hour programming is all on the way.